Now, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump have clashed in a presidential election debate in Philadelphia. It was the first time meeting for the two in the key swing state of Pennsylvania. They sparred on the economy, immigration, reproductive rights, and the rule of law in a battle that shifted from respectful tones to direct attacks on character. The Democrat and Republican also delved into foreign policy issues, from Gaza to Ukraine to relationships with America's global adversaries. As shown Bryce Peace reports, both sides will claim victory after the 90-minute duel, but it was Kamala Harris with a standout performance on the night. Right out of the gate, Harris dominated, walking over to Trump to introduce herself and exchange pleasantries about having a good debate. But that was about as much love on display between the nominees, with an opening question about the top issue in this election cycle, the economy, an area where voters view the Republican more favorably. Elizabeth Sidiropoulos, Chief Executive of the South African Institute of International Affairs, join us to expand on this. Very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. The debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump began with a handshake. From that point, it took off rather seriously. Harris entering the debate as a candidate on the offensive, but often caught her opponent Donald Trump on his back foot. What did you make of the exchanges?
Yes, I think absolutely. I think your characterization is quite correct. First was the opportunity for Kamala Harris coming into the election campaign process, literally sort of, just over, six weeks ago, to communicate both how effective or presidential she can be, as well as her ideas and policies for should she be elected president. That was certainly one of the most important dimensions that she would need to achieve going into the debate. Yeah. The other dimension was, of course, the ability to not allow Trump to get under her skin. And in fact, what happened was quite the opposite. I think she was able to really needle him very effectively on some of the perhaps less important points that many undecided and independent voters would want to hear from both candidates, which is around what they would want to do concretely for them. But it certainly rattled the former president, and by most accounts, he came out the worse off in this debate than Kamala Harris.
Yeah, both Harris and Trump discussed one of the other big talking points, the economy, at great length. Trump put a lot of emphasis on a period of sharp inflation that has now eased, but has many Americans still reeling. Harris, on the other hand, spoke about her plan to build what she called an opportunity economy. What did you make of this discussion? Because it's one which is rather important.
Absolutely, it is very important because it's what people feel in their pockets. And so certainly the sense throughout the campaign has been that it's the economy that is really one of the most important dimensions of how people will vote. I think if we're going to be honest with the way in which Kamala performed on that count, she probably was able to navigate it quite deftly, to not go into a great deal of detail about some of the policy prescripts that certainly sound very good for ordinary Americans, middle class Americans. But the big challenge there is, of course, how one is going to pay for it, whether one and how the fiscus is going to pay for it.
Perhaps Elizabeth, if you'll allow me to interrupt you, perhaps let's listen to those sound bites and get a better sense of what was said between the two. Okay, we'll go back to that. My team is still trying to get hold of that. But, it will be important, of course, when it comes to implementation and how all of this will pan out. What did you make of Trump's assessment?
Assessment in terms of his performance, or specifically about the economy?
Sorry, specifically about the economy.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of fake news going about, and some of this was thankfully corrected by the moderators. Others have been corrected subsequently. I think this was always going to be the point on which he attacked Kamala Harris. She is the vice president after all. The economy, particularly in the area of inflation, has not done too well over the last 4 years, although the inflation peaked sort of, I think, mid 2022, reaching 8-9%, and now has really come off. And I think inflation figures published today show that it's really down to 2.5%. But the bottom line is the way in which ordinary Americans feel it in their pocket is what gives them a sense of inflation, and in the same way that it affects us as well. So the figures are not important. What ordinary Americans feel is that they're poorer than they might have been 4 years ago, that some of them may have lost their jobs, although the unemployment rate, something that Trump said was fake news associated with some of the statements he made there. Unemployment has dropped. It's the kind of unemployment that we would like to have, I think, just over 4.5%. But that's not the way many people feel it, and particularly the people in some of the swing states that at the end of the day are going to determine the outcome of the election. This is not about looking at the election figure, at the support for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump in gross national terms. This is really about looking at how they will be performing in those 7 battleground states where it's neck and neck. This is a toss-up election. And the economy and the conviction around the policies that each of the candidates sets out, and the extent to which there is some detail in it, will certainly swing the voters that are not decided. And I think that's very important. And this is what this debate was also about. It was the undecided voters, the independents, whether they're going to decide to vote for Harris or for Trump.
Let's in fact listen to that debate around the economy.
Let's talk about what Donald Trump left us. Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression. Donald Trump left us the worst public health epidemic in a century. Donald Trump left us the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. And what we have done is clean up Donald Trump's mess.
We've had a terrible economy because inflation which is really known as a country buster. It breaks up countries. We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history. This has been a disaster for people, for the middle class, but for every class. We are working on things. We're going to do it, and we're going to replace it. But remember this.
American hero, the late, great John McCain, I will never forget that night, walked onto the Senate floor and said, "No, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't get rid of the Affordable Care Act. You have no plan." And what the Affordable Care Act has done is eliminate the ability of insurance companies to deny people with pre-existing conditions. I don't have to tell the people watching, when I went to meet with President Zelensky, I've now met with him over 5 times. The reality is it has been about standing as America.
Discussion, of course, highlighting the economy. Of course, we can see, just reading from body language of Elizabeth, you mentioned that the ability of Harris not to allow Trump to get under her skin, well, was clearly visible. I mean, as you watch the frustrated Donald Trump almost huffing and puffing. But the other matter which stood out very strongly was the candidates facing off on foreign policy issues, including the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, a potential ceasefire deal in Gaza, and the war in Ukraine. What was your position on that?
Well, I think, not much has moved on those fronts. And I think what was really interesting, the big elephant in the room that was missing, of course, was really the discussion on China in any significant way. I mean, on Gaza, Kamala Harris has probably been a little bit more empathetic, and not just in the debate, but certainly over the last couple of months, to the tragic humanitarian suffering that is happening in Gaza, but has certainly continued to emphasize the importance of Israel's right to defend itself, and obviously for the return of hostages. She did call for an end for a ceasefire and an end to the war, and for a two-state solution. But what was missing there, of course, was some of the detail about how one might actually achieve that, and what are the levers that a US president might be willing to exercise. And we've heard a lot about these levers over the last several months in order to bring that about. Of course, on Donald Trump's side, he spoke. He said she hated the Israelis. She hated the Palestinians. This, he would be able to finish this very quickly. He made the same point about Ukraine. You almost got the sense from Donald Trump that there isn't a broader chessboard of geopolitics playing itself out, that, the minute he becomes president, he will be in a position to call the parties together, whether it's Ukraine or Gaza or whatever, and say, sort it out, get this over and done with, finish this war. And of course, it's a much more complex a geopolitical environment than that. And it's not, President Putin didn't decide to invade Ukraine because he felt that Biden was going to allow him to do that, or that if Trump was there, he wouldn't have done it. There is a history there and a broader great power conflict. So I think in both cases, I think there was a lot of detail lacking in how one might achieve an end to a war, or a ceasefire, or an exchange of hostages, and clear lack of really engagement on the big topic of China, which has, in fact, in many ways, been a bipartisan issue in the US, both the Democrats and the Republicans. Donald Trump introduced a whole slew of tariffs against China. Those were not reversed. Of course, if he were to become president, he has indicated that he's going to slap a 60% across the board tariff on Chinese products. If that's not going to help fuel inflation, then I don't know what for the American consumer. Yeah. And a lot of American economic think tanks have actually criticized his policies. But that, of course, is going to be the defining issue in foreign policy for the United States. For whoever is the next president on the 21st of January next year.
Very well. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Elizabeth Sidiropoulos, Chief Executive of the South African Institute of International Affairs, just giving us some analysis on the Harris-Trump presidential debate.